welcome to another episode of Stuck in My Mind podcast. I am your host, Wize, and my guest today is a leadership coach and people and culture expert who helps professionals stop waiting for opportunities and start stepping into leadership. She has spent years working in talent acquisition, recruitment, and leadership development, identifying high potential individuals inside organizations and helping them unlock the next level of their careers. She is the creator of the Managers to Leaders program, a framework designed to help managers transition into leadership roles in just 90 days. Through her signature authority shift method, she teaches professionals how to build confidence, strengthen their leadership mindset, and develop a personal brand that positions them as leaders worth following. Please welcome to the show, Shirley Sutton.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today and talk about, the Authority Shift Manager to Leaders program.
I'm excited to have you. So Shirley, what first sparked your interest in leadership and talent development?
So I've had a long background of recruitment, talent, and HR. I've worked with many leaders, managers, high potential employees that have moved into, the jungle of corporate land. And I've seen very similar patterns of how people behave, how they respond to the new role, and things like that. And when I did my certification years ago in neurolinguistic programming, I started kind of, putting it into. I was seeing it more play out in the corporate land, and that's probably where I am today, which is why I started my own business and focusing on this specifically.
So working in recruitment and talent, what patterns did you notice among high performers?
So in talent and recruitment, that was probably going back 10 years ago. So most recently I've been in, people and culture in HR, is really that, different motivators, right? That people come into, or why they apply for roles, or why they leave, organizations and things like that, or why they start applying internally. So there's probably, I think it's not so much that, a lot of people think people just move because of the money. Yes, that can be true, but I think there's a lot of, other factors that come into play, which is, finding the right environment. Is it actually still ticking, what drives the person, what motivates them? Yeah, that's probably, from a nutshell in terms of what I've seen in the past.
So why do many talented professionals struggle to move into leadership positions?
Yeah, so what I've seen played out, and people that I've helped fully move into that, is really a lot of it has to do with the identity shift, moving into that role. So a lot of the times, emerging leaders really good in their job, and they get put into a succession plan because they're good at what they do. Well, a lot of the times when a role becomes available, and then they move there, provided they want to move into that role. Or at times it could also be because, they want to go with someone internally, given that they already know the company culture. It's easier to mold, it's easier to, transition them into the role. But a lot of the times when the person hasn't fully accepted, I bring it down to the person's mindset in terms of accepting this is the role I'm in today. A lot of the people leadership, a lot of that people management, it's really quite different to just running your own desk, where as an individual contributor, you're really running what you need to achieve, quarter by quarter, year after year. Whereas when you're promoted into that people, when you're looking after other people, then you really do need to step into a very different hat. You really have to fully accept that, okay, it's not just me achieving, completing the target or completing the project. There's a team that comes with me now. And how do I actually get the best out of the people, that you're not the one getting burnt out, solving everything for the team?
Okay. So was there a defining moment that led you to create the Managers to Leaders program? I'm sorry, I'm losing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
For me, it was an easy transition given that it was what I was doing in the corporate space. I was working with a lot of senior leaders when it came to promotions or moving people internally. So I could easily see the challenge when someone moves into a new role, whether it be a sideways move or moving up the ladder. It's really about fully embracing that role and being clear about the challenges ahead. So which is the reason why when I wanted to specialize in this area of leadership, I really wanted to focus on the strengths that I could bring and help people. A lot of which is why I bring in, that authority shift, that identity shift when people are moving. A lot of the times as well, people don't really, and I tie it back into personal branding. As I mentioned, I did have my own career coaching many years ago, went back into corporate, and then now back into doing my own thing. And personal branding is really something that a lot of people probably don't really think about, and they just think it's a company fluff or a corporate fluffs. Some have called it, but for me, it's quite important because as a leader or a business, it's really people want to work with you, more so than the logo behind it. And when you're actually managing and leading a team, a lot of it actually comes down to, when someone's deciding, especially external people, if they're applying for 2 jobs and you get 2 offers, yes, you do consider the company. But most of all, people, look up the manager on LinkedIn, they have a look at different reviews, they talk to people in the industry, and, that's where your reputation really echoes in terms of, are you attracting the right talent? You know, how do you think people feel when you leave the room? So it goes back to all of that, branding, not just the company branding.
Okay. So what mistakes did you make early in your career that helped shape your leadership philosophy, and how did your own leadership journey influence the work you do today?
Oh, I made many mistakes. We could be here all day talking about all the mistakes I've done, which probably, for me, it's really a big. People are allowed to make mistakes as long as you probably learn from it and
Hmm.
and take it as a learning and feedback.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really different people respond to things differently. Okay. I'm not, it's so easy to kind of see what a micromanager is. And, managers who are also very hands off, don't want to touch anything. And for me, it's really finding that balance where, you know, probably in my way younger days, and I was leading a small team where I wasn't so aware how I was because I just thought, okay, I need to check what's being done. Is that actually how I was so like, I was like a control freak.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until someone told me that that person actually would cry. And I was like, what? I thought I was helping. Do they not want help? I thought, and so there's a lot of that, right? And then as the years went on, then I obviously started being a bit more aware, and someone would, I also had feedback where I wasn't giving enough information, and I'm like, okay, maybe that person needed something very different. And then yeah, so for me, it's really a very different, is I find out first what the person is like. I'm really big on reading the person's personality. If they like, point form, how they like to receive information, whether it be someone reporting to me or indirectly or just working, together. It's like, how do they actually want to receive that? Because I'm very aware about the style I work, and I'm quite direct. I don't do a lot of fluff, like I just want to be, I'm a little bit like point form, right? But if someone likes to work very differently, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, for me, it's about how the other person also likes to be led, or how they want to receive information. And it's not a one size fits all. I think the leader has to be the one that needs to adjust if you do want to get the best out of someone.
So as a leader, it's you have to figure out how how's the best way to get that person motivated or inspired or whatever. Yeah, and sometimes you just have to find that spot that's kind of like where you know that person, where you know you're able to help that person. Like, not like you said, not everyone is led the same way, right? Like, not everyone takes leadership in the same way. So it's good to learn your team and see the best way to lead each individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the longer you've also interacted with someone, and I really did make an obvious decision to really get to know people that I deal with. When I did new linguistic programming, it's really about understanding people's patterns, right? Is that person you're working with operating from whatever background they've come from? Is it actually coming from an old programming? And people that I work with in my coaching program, it's really identifying, I do like little assessments and stuff like that to identify what the person is like, and are they actually operating, are they on survival mode? Because there's so much happening in the industry. There's so many restructures. AI is making things move a lot faster. I can go on a whole different topic of that, of how it's really changed and still changing the workforce. That, yeah, it does make things faster. More ideas are being generated, which also means the people have to adapt and do it a lot quicker, right? But how are people actually, like, it's not like we can put in a software on managers' brains and say, okay, you're upgraded now. You're like on Claude 5.6 or whatever. But it's really about, you're dealing with people that's actually adjusting with this whole new, and is the old programming for them already? Are they still operating in fear? That's why they're micromanaging and having to check or make sure it looks exactly how they want it to be. Or, are you someone who's just giving guidelines and really set the boundaries? In that way, you're actually empowering them to do what they need to do.
So what's the difference between being a manager and being a leader?
The way I look at it, for me, a manager is really, like you're doing all the right, you're ticking all the boxes, right? And I think everyone has to start there. We've all started there. And for me, a leader is really someone that lifts and, empowers someone. So I'm really big on giving, the grow questions and asking, encouraging them to ask open-ended questions. So you're not actually the one coming up with all the answers. Managers and leaders don't need to have all the answers. A lot of the times, if something's being raised, that person probably thinks it could be done better. What does that look like? If this isn't how you think it should be, how do you think we can get there? And for me, a manager really is, it's being able to, help your team, escalate it. Whereas a leader, for me, is really the one that coaches and mentors and, really shows that doing something for that person in the next step in that person's career.
So why do some managers get promoted while others stay stuck?
various things, but a lot of the times it's actually a mindset shift. It's really about, have I fully stepped into this role? Am I still operating in my old identity? Am I too afraid to say, I don't know how to do this? Because really, a lot of the times when you become a people leader, there's a lot of these really tricky and uncomfortable conversations that needs to have. And it's really about, and sometimes, especially in middle management, is there's just so much to do. You're still doing your own, what you're meant to be doing, and then now you're responsible for however big your team is. Let alone those ones that work in big companies that operate in, multiple regions and time zones and all of that. So it's a little bit overwhelming, and it's really being able to, that's why for me, the moment you understand how your team operates individually, then that delegation, because not only are you delegating the work so you can focus on other stuff, but really you're also empowering and giving you're also enhancing another skill set you're also training that person.
Okay. So can you explain the authority shift method?
So for me, it's the authority shift is really getting the person to, fully be aware of where they are today, right? Working on your personal brand. And then identifying where you would like to be. It's really about being clear about the outcome of what the person wants to fully step into. And actually working out, different stuff. Like it's not another management course. A lot of them already have MBAs, probably better, highly educated than me. But it's really about taking them there. Are you still what patterns are you actually operating in? And is that still relevant for your team, how they are today? And it's looking at, the different, the boundaries that they have, the style that they bring in, and really getting them to move from being that executor to being the visionary. And really, can you actually see it from the other person's point of view? And do you know if that technique, that how you actually convey that message to Will works for Paul, for example, or how do you actually adjust that messaging? So that's really what I take them through, is that a lot of it is actually an inner work that I go through with them, because that's obviously what they bring out and what is visible. If the person's doing the work, it's that's actually the energy that they bring to the team, and how they actually take them through that and how they influence the team.
All right. So how important is personal branding in today's workplace?
Oh, I think it's important. I'm really big on that. It's the reputation. It's the footprint that you leave with a team or in the company. It's really, especially with two things, right? Like if you're a leader in corporate, and how do you actually leave that lasting effect with the members of your team when they do move on? Are you someone that say, oh, I wish I was still working with this person? Or is it like, I'm so glad that person's no longer leading the team? What did I learn from that person? What was another string that they actually gave me? Or, you don't want that to be like a negative. For me, when you're meeting someone, you should leave not in that icky kind of, that was so uncomfortable. I feel crap about myself. But for business owners as well that are leading their own business, especially, the solopreneurs, especially those ones that, don't have a team anymore. And then that shift of, and I've been through that way from corporate where you've got a team and all of that, and all of a sudden it's just you and like, another person or a virtual assistant or an AI. It's very different, and that personal branding it's always good to kind of revisit, how it is when you're meeting clients, when you step out of a meeting, what do people actually say about you when you're not in the room. And I think it's very powerful, and it's definitely something that people need to think about, is that reputation. And that's also something that I'll give to everyone at the end of this, is really to, do your own personal branding checklist. It doesn't take long, 15 minutes, and really just think about, how are you actually leaving? What's the impression that you're leaving with the team or your clients? I think it's quite important to always revisit that as part of your own reflection.
But what are some signs that someone is ready for leadership but doesn't realize it? Like they don't know that they are natural leaders.
Look, I'll give you an example. I've worked with someone before who wasn't leading a team, but I really do see the true leadership in that person. The way they handled conversations. It's almost like they're influencing a decision without selling. And they didn't want to lead a team, but they just like being their own individual contributor. And a lot of the times, they could see the way they hold the room. And I think it goes back to that, being able to customize depending on your audience. It's really like they were very authentic in the way they explained things. Not so much. It's providing a solution, not even selling a product or an idea without even knowing, but really answering that in a way. And for me, that was really good leadership. And for me, when we say a leader, doesn't necessarily mean people leadership, because leadership can be just your the way you influence things. The way you influence a decision making. And for me, there is some out there that's really good in picking it out in terms of, okay, I think you're ready for that next one, right? Organizations also do have what they call your capability framework, in terms of, are you actually meeting all of these capabilities in this role? But that also goes back to, is there an opportunity available at that time from a headcount perspective? However, I will also say not to let that stop that person, because I've also seen great people that companies have actually created a role for them that wasn't necessarily there, but, as a retention and all of that. And that's where you really see the transformation, is when someone actually notices it. It's like, it's good to work with someone when they are very clear about the outcome they want to achieve. But when other people actually come to me and say, do you know what? I actually had really good feedback on, so that it's working. Yeah, so hopefully that, sorry, I rambled a bit there, but hopefully that answers. I can go on about it.
Yeah, it's fine. So what leadership habits separate the top performers from everyone else?
For me, it's about how you lead and the way you influence the team. So there's a lot of talk about, the social, I can never say the word, but the psychological safety in the workplace. Is that leader actually providing that, right? That, they feel like, okay, not only is it safe here, but am I still actually motivated to be retained, or am I just actually staying here because, so for me, the motivation and the driver, for me, a good leader really is that you can provide, the person is still satisfied and happy to stay there for the next 3 to 5 years in their career. And then, you need to revisit that again. What are your long-term career goals, and how you actually contributing to that today. So it's quite important that for me, a leader really needs to be able to not come up with all the solutions, but really be able to influence that decision and the situation at hand.
So how can leaders build influence without relying on the title?
There's a lot of ways, like how you convey the message, how you execute that particular vision. It's really the way you respond to the different people, and that's quite broad because different people respond to things very differently. But also just being authentic and hearing people out without actually making it feel like, oh, that was such a dumb idea, or that was a challenge. But it's like how you actually build that resilience in people as well, because there's so many challenges and obstacles that businesses face, but it's actually the people that are really being hit with that. So being able to influence that is really being really able to guide them. It's almost like they're on the sideline, and you're coaching them from the side without actually being the one on the field. So really guiding them, coming up with, okay, how do you, and that's where the empowerment really comes in, is because if you're not actually giving them that opportunity to learn, then you're not really giving them that empowerment and the opportunity to come up with ideas. So you're not really strengthening that team. So everything will land on you. So you're back on that. You're doing everything. You've added to the statistic of the burnt out leader. So it's really about, there's a lot really that comes into play with it. It's like, how do you leverage on not just the skill set in your team, the tools, it's such a big, it's almost like looking at different puzzles moving all the time. And I think, being able to influence really is quite key, without having to have the answers for everything. Not give all the answers for everything is, it's almost like, really taking them through that journey and, before coming to that decision.
Oh, okay. So what leadership skills will be most important over the next 5 years?
Look, for me, it's that resilience and the adaptability. We don't know, even in the next 18 months, we can sort of predict what's going to happen with, the fast nature of AI being implemented. And I think there's that big mindset shift of how you as a person have to be resilient. Are you operating from fear of, am I going to lose my job? But what I can say is, in a lot of systems implemented, have always created a lot of work. And I think AI will create, I think it will really change that workforce landscape in terms of, but it will create a different skill set. Because even using that now, it's very different to how you actually ask it compared to Google.
Yeah.
And a lot of people ask it like, hey, it's for fun, like you putting stuff in there, but it's very different in how you put the commands. And obviously people's skill set are very, very different to how it was probably 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So how has leadership changed since we started going remote and hybrid work became more common?
Yeah, I've definitely seen that shift. Because when did we go remote?
2020. Yeah.
Yeah, like 6-7 years ago, right? And it was obviously very different because some companies were not even big on, this work from home business. And a lot of that, I've definitely seen the micromanagers, or those ones that were so controlling, found it really difficult. It's like, are they online? Are they not? It was such a, and again, that's probably the fear of, so I really do think, good leaders, you just got to have to trust them that it will be done. And very different type of mentality of, are you logged on 9 to 5? or is it actually the output of, because I've also seen cases where companies have tracked. I think there was a case last year where someone actually tracked, how many, like the keystrokes apparently, and it was like, it was like an unfair dismissal or something like that. And but I think the manager really has to change, and that trust really has to be there. But also goes down to when you're doing your goal setting, is what do you want them to actually achieve and how to get there. Because it's very different now seeing someone next to you just sitting there 9 to 5, but are they 9 to 5 surfing the internet? Or, because I've seen people that are really like, the moment they're on their desk, they're just like, it's like, don't talk to them, like they're really on that work zone. So I think, again, that's another thing that leaders is that trust. For me, what I really did see was that trust piece when everyone started working from home is, you needed to be clear about what needed to be achieved. Do you tie that in with our KPIs? Because you're not going to be able to tie it in with the hours that they've clocked in.
Okay. What advice would you give someone who feels overlooked in their organization?
I think gaining that clarity for me. Do you feel overlooked, but are you actually aiming for that visibility to be promoted? Okay, and believing in yourself and putting steps on how to get there, right? So I can help on the steps to get there, but the clarity of where the person wants to be in 6 months, 12 months, they have to come up with that. How determined are they? Because if the commitment isn't there, I can't help you get there. The steps to get there, you can. But being really able to gain that clarity of what you want, but also somewhere along the way is really to ask yourself, why do I want that role? Do you want to move there because you want to be able to influence and do good and, all of that? Or you do want to get there because of monetary drivers, which is also fine. But I think it's just that clarity, because the moment you start leading a team, you're not just responsible for you as a person. You live so much with a team. And if you're going in there with, your own fear and your own wounds and all of that, then it gets, that energy really leaks out. And then it's almost like you want to make sure that you're leaving a good impression and you're also having a positive impact on people's career.
Awesome. So how can emerging leaders build confidence when they struggle with self-doubt? Because a lot of people, that's one of the key issues is the self-doubt.
Yeah, so really that imposter syndrome, I've definitely seen that a lot. I think one way is really to dust it off, quite bluntly, is just, what's the worst that can happen? Okay, what are you doubting about? Why are you not believing in yourself? Where is this coming from? Where is this doubt coming from? They wouldn't have looked at you if they didn't think there was a glimmer of potential that they saw in you. So it's always, when I do get them, I don't know if I should apply for the role. I get that quite a lot. I don't know if I should go for it. It's like, what's the worst that can happen if they say no? The worst thing is you can ask for feedback. Why didn't I get it? And stop questioning. Yeah, you do have to question yourself, but at the same time, it goes back to that, what is the outcome? Do you want to be in this role for the next 5 years? And if it is, that's also fine, provided you don't feel like you've outgrown it. And a lot of people, actually, there's a lifestyle, it's a lifestyle decision to stay in some roles because of, maybe kids are little or something, and you get the flexibility, or you like the location, or again, goes back to different motivators. But imposter syndrome is really, and I did go through that, especially coming back from maternity leave, where I was really questioning my whole relevance and the lack of sleep and all of that your confidence strips away. And it's really about that, just For me, it was really just like snap out of it. And some people don't really, but for me, that was really kind of like, for me, I'm really just, you need to just dust yourself off, okay? If you've made a mistake, that's how you got here and you're questioning yourself. But sometimes it's really just that overthinking stuff all the time. Would you agree? Would you see that a lot of it is just overthinking, but really how they even got to questioning themselves has got nothing to do with, digging that hole. Like you just keep digging and going, oh, but this, but that. It's like, no, forget it. Nothing.
Oh
You
yeah.
just, yeah, if you made a mistake, you just learn from it and you move and you use that as a learning.
That for me, when I launched like I had in 2019, I had purchased this podcasting studio from Amazon, and I had it home, and I had it in the house, and I was just making up excuses like, oh, who's gonna want to listen to me? Why would should I record a podcast? And if it took me getting furloughed from work in 2020 to finally make myself uncomfortable and challenge myself to launch the podcast, and like anyone, you have those doubts. You just have those doubts, like I'm not. Who's gonna like? Who am I that people want to listen to me? So those doubts creeped in, and it's like I said, it took me just facing that fear and just challenging myself to do it. And here I am, 6 years later, over 300 episodes recorded, and it's just
Amazing.
so much fun. Yeah.
And I've listened to a lot of your shows. I mean, they're great. You've got a lot of really good topics, and you can really see that you've picked those ones that do. It's beyond the surface that
Yeah.
you look at, which is great.
So, what legacy do you hope to leave through your work?
Look, for me, it's really when I got my coaching. The reason why I obviously wanted to focus on career and leadership. It's the fact that we really are in our work or our business 5 days a week. So what I'm trying to, the legacy I'd like to leave is, it should be a big part of that when we look back when you're 70 years old or, retiring is, did I actually make the most of my working life? And I think a leader, that's why I always go back to, that personal branding is how did you actually make people feel? How did you actually leave? Because a lot of the times it's not really about what you said, okay? Like they remember that and that will ring in someone's ear when you're giving that feedback or lecture, whatever you want to call it. Like sometimes it does ring on people's ear, they're like, oh, Shirley, but they said this and that and that and that, and it rings. And then you talk to them weeks later and it changes slightly, right? But
Yeah.
one thing is consistent is how that person felt when they walked out of that meeting, and do you actually want to look back and say, I could have done better. I could have done it differently because I was so stressed out that I lashed out on someone, or did I was too scared to speak up and someone missed out, and it's really that working with people so that they can actually really look after their teams and, make their careers meaningful because a manager and leader, you really do leave that, that legacy in your own team.
Awesome. If someone listening knows they're capable of more but feels invisible at work, what's the first step they should take today to start being seen as a leader?
Speak up. Speak up, speak to your manager. If you're not in a leadership role, see what programs are available internally, externally. There's so many free courses, there's so many podcasts. I mean, that's what we're here today. There's so many different stories out there of how people actually got there. I did used to get that quite a lot is when they want to be visible in another area, not specifically in their business group. There's different types of, you can reach out to that person, for coffee or a drink or something, and then just so you're actually front of mind when they start recruiting, or when they're doing, for example, careers fair, or if they're doing, lunch and learns is, you want to be part of that. right? And really be able to, but if you're not going to speak up, no one's going to see you, no one's going to hear you. And, you know, you'll always be wondering, I should have, I could have, it could have been this. But regret is such a, it's such a wasteful energy. I don't have a right term for that. It's so, that I should have, could have, whatever could have happened, but you'll never know because you never actually spoke up that that's what you wanted.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we've come to the part of the show where you get the spotlight, you get to plug away, let everybody know where they can connect to you, where they can find you, everything.
So you can find me. I'm on LinkedIn, Shirley Sutton. You can also visit my website, ascendly.online. That's ASCNDLY.online. I will also include a free gift, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the checklist for personal branding. I really do encourage you to do it, just to really think about, how you're actually leaving the room, how are you being, and how do you want to be seen at the end of the day, because really that's the legacy that you leave behind. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. But don't leave just yet. Let me close
Oh,
out the show, and we'll chat a little bit off the air. But thank you so much. This has been great, and I appreciate your time.
thanks so much for having me.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. All right, everybody, another great episode. I want to thank Shirley Sutton for joining us and sharing practical leadership insights that anyone can apply starting today. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Stuck in My Mind podcast, leave a review, and share this conversation with someone who's ready to step into leadership. And remember, leadership isn't about waiting for permission. It's about showing up with confidence, clarity, and purpose. Stay wise. You know how your boy does it? Peace out.